Okay, good evening, everyone. We'll make a start, everyone.
How do you change?
Good evening. It's okay. Good evening, everyone, and good evening to everyone online. Welcome to our December festive Royal Met Soc meeting. We've got two great speakers tonight. So we're going to be looking at the challenge of TV weather broadcasting. I'll introduce our speakers in a second. I'll just run through a little bit of housekeeping. The next slide is not too exciting anyway. It's any first aid, then we'll, here we go. If you need first aid or assistance, then myself or one of the team at the back will help you out. There's no fire drill tonight, and the exit is out to our left here, and we'll be directed out there, so no issues with that. Yeah, this is our coming talks for the rest of the season through till March. Some good talks. We've got our PhD showcase in January with our speakers selected from the Early Careers Conference. Some exciting speakers there. And then we're having an away leg in Aberdeen. And we're going to go to Aberdeen, and we've got Michael Redding and Mark Diggins talking to us about snow conditions and avalanches. So that should be quite an exciting talk. Again, a hybrid talk, so if you can't make it to Aberdeen, you can join online. But please do join us if you can. And then to finish our season for this year, kind of hot topic, we're looking at artificial intelligence within weather forecasting. So that should be quite an interesting talk as well. The next slide is just a little plug for all things our Mets. We've got our Met Matters newsletter, so do sign up if you want to, and you'll get lots of information and blogs. And then you're all very welcome, members and non-members welcome, but a quick plug for membership and all the advantages are there. Access to journals, events, conferences, grants, and accreditation and all sorts. So please follow the links there if you've got any interest in the membership. So enough from me. Let's look at our speakers. We've got two speakers today. We've got Jo Farrow and Mona Lukha. And they're going to talk to us, as I say, about the challenge of TV weather forecasting. Jo became interested in weather at age 12. As I'm sure many of us in this room, early starters, and was a forecaster at the Met Office before working at Birmingham Weather Centre, ITV and BBC. She now works for Netweather and volunteers with Girl Guiding still to this day. And Mona is the head of the ITV news team at Millbank Studios and leading the team there. And she also previously worked at the Met Office before branching into broadcasting. Mona is also the chair of ITV's International Ambassador Network and a council member for Royal Meteorological Society, that's coming up, and a member of the Climate Ambassadors Steering Group. So enough for me. I'll hand over to our speakers and look forward to hearing all about it.
Hello, everyone. It used to be when you told anyone that you were a weather forecaster, two questions would inevitably arise. Why do you always get it wrong? Which is blatantly incorrect. And are you on the telly? Well, yes, Nali and I are, but most forecasters aren't. Weather presenters are just a tiny fraction of the weather world. Although they have been the public face of television weather for decades, and yet for those under the age of 45, we are completely unknown. Waiting until after the lunchtime or 10 o'clock news to see who is presenting the weather is a fading pastime. Younger people watch short Instagram reels, TikTok videos, or at times longer content on YouTube. There are occasional weather explainers that might go viral for a few days as a forecaster explains perhaps about the percentage chance of rain. Imminent weather information can just pop up on feeds with chat and opinion about the latest named storm, but it is rarely from a national weather service provider. For day-to-day information, many people just use the weather app on their phone. But a weather app does not explain, not always give enough detail. So here we've got the Met Office app, BBC app, and some information from Netweather in the middle. Now, our business is communication. There's all this weather data and at times additional warnings and alerts, and they need translating and compacting, resulting in public service broadcasting with a smile. To begin with, it's not an easy role. We have to speak without auto cue. We point at maps that aren't actually there. And often we've just got a green screen behind us. We're part of news, but separate. We represent scientific information whilst being a public figure with a friendly face. It's quite a combination. And weather broadcasts started on the radio back in the early 1920s with the shipping forecast and a daily weather update. The first presented UK weather bulletin on television was broadcast in 1954 when a Met officer, George Cowling, interpreted the map and was seen in vision. This was a change from the existing weather read where only the charts were visible. So on screen, we've got a young Sean Batty there, head of the weather. The guy in the dinner jacket was presenting the weather just before the STV night out. So he decided to glam up before going out afterwards. So are we okay for the video? So we're going to have a look at a short video clip here from the BBC archive. And this was the first television broadcast for BBC Scotland back in 1959.
Floods over most of the country by tomorrow. In eastern districts, there will be sunny period the first tomorrow, and the rain later will be only slight. But in western places, it will remain dull for most of the day, and there will be periods of drizzle with coast and hill parts. The temperature will not fall below the middle 40s tonight. Tomorrow it will rise generally.
So
Okay, who's controlling the computer is going to get in trouble.
Mona's IT.
See all of the stuff he's been.
So the graphics have come on slightly. This led to a succession of weathermen, and they became household names as they presented the weather regularly on television for many years. There was a time when you really knew you'd made it if you were included in the Tribe of Toffs song. John Ketley is a weatherman, and so is Michael Fish, Billy Giles, Ian McCaskill, and Wincy Willis.
Oh, he's lost the presentation. Oh. Next screen. Oh, there we go.
Others appeared on Royal Mail postage stamps. Barbara Edwards was the first national BBC female weather presenter, appearing in the 1970s, which included the long, hot summer of 1976, which she said was really quite boring to talk about. Just hot, dry and sunny every single day.
£2.20.
And actually, us weather presenters still feel the same. We much prefer talking about a juicy low pressure to a week of anticyclonic doom, gloom and doom. Nowadays, we can fill our summer forecast with health aspects, so air pollution or pollen data, UV levels, or even extreme heat warnings. Back then, the charts arrived by fax, and there were magnetic symbols ready for the two broadcasts, one at lunchtime and the other in the evening. There were 3 charts to walk back and forwards between, and a broadcast was typically about 2 to 3 minutes long, so a decent amount of time. However, for the Met Office employees based at Bracknell, Gatwick or London Weather Centre, the television role brought huge changes. They were thrust into the public eye with a very intrusive press. After listening to an interview with Barbara Edwards, I realised there were similarities 40 years on about shift working, the early starts, and for us, for a time, long night shifts at BBC Weather Centre, covering BBC World, News 24, and 5 a.m. recordings of all 10 early morning bulletins for the BBC nations and regions. Back then, if the public wanted to pass comment, they would have to write a letter, put it in an envelope, and put a stamp on it and post it in the postbox. Nowadays, they can just whip out their phones, type all sorts of things, and there is very little personal cost. Those letters had to also make it past the BBC Weather Centre secretary, and she would generally sift out any of the dodgy ones. Even so, in the days of snail mail, there were still some peculiar letters, rude comments about pregnant women daring to appear on screen, along with declarations of love from abroad, even marriage proposals from the far reaches of BBC World. Social media is a current challenge. Whilst the Twitter of old was a wonderful place to follow scientists and link to other weather enthusiasts, that time has passed, thanks to Elon Musk's X. Many of us moved to a media role from the steady, protected world of the civil service. Surviving on such platforms needs careful navigating, supportive management, and often a low profile. There aren't many weather presenters who thrive in such places. It can be such a toxic environment. Most avoid it altogether, but some local and specialty weather enthusiasts have done well online. So, my day at STV. STV is based in Glasgow. That's where the main offices are. They also have an office here in Edinburgh. It's near Tollcross. They also have some staff in Dundee and Aberdeen. But as I'm coming in from the east, getting the train to Edinburgh is much easier. However, the office is closed in Edinburgh at the weekend, so I have to make my way across towards Glasgow. That does give me a really good window on the weather across Scotland before I start my shift, starting from the east coast and going across to the west. So when I get in, the first part is to gather the weather story. I can read all the Met Office guidance. I get a briefing when I phone up Exeter. We have a chat about various things, but also have to be aware of the news. What's been going on recently? It might be when you walk into the newsroom, a journalist will pounce on you and say, what's happening with all this rain? Or is it going to be hot at the weekend? But we have to be mindful of if there has been flooding the week before, or if there's been a drought, how we speak about any heavy rain. So the role is about interpretation and translation. We've got huge amounts of model data. What's going to be the message of the day and who are our audience? Now the factors for that will be what time of day is it? Lunchtime audience is different to after the 10 o'clock at night. What's coming up? So do we have sporting events, outdoor events, the holidays? Is it half term, summer holidays, a bank holiday when lots of people may be traveling, or even coming up to the Christmas travel period? We'll think about the preceding weather as well, but one important thing is it going to snow? Snow is a huge draw for the television audience. Our numbers will rocket, and they want to come to their local news. So STV has 4 regions. They can come and get very specific updates about the snow. So I'm creating my bulletin. I'm sitting at my weather desk. It's outside of the studio. We have set bulletins that are the correct length of time, but we can swap things. So The first chart is called a scene setter. You might choose to put in the radar or a satellite picture, and then we can move around perhaps today, tonight, tomorrow, the outlook, those kind of charts, and the temperatures as well. The only time symbols really appear nowadays are in the outlook, but we can swap those. So I could change the symbol from sunshine to a shower. And with the temperatures, when I phone up Exeter, we want that the ITV bulletin is saying the same thing. Say for Aberdeen, if it was 19, then my chart should also say 19. The warnings, we can drop on the triangles, the yellow, amber triangles. We can also drop on the area, so that's quite good. The Met Office have drawn out an area. We can drop that onto our maps and then use the timeline to make it appear at 10 o'clock at night and then fade off at 3. We can add in lots of data layers. We can add in temperature contrast. We can also add in the radar and the satellite. And then one click and it will run for the allocated time, and it's just our job to keep up. So we sit in the newsroom alongside the journalists and the editors. This makes it really easy to answer any questions and maybe perhaps intervene or steer if somebody's getting a little bit over enthusiastic and heading off in a slightly incorrect direction, shall we say. A growing part of our daily role is to assist online journalists with their digital content. And we also need to be available for interviews on big weather days. So this is behind the scenes. That's the makeup room there. And then that's in the studio. That's what I see, just that green screen. There's another monitor which some people use, so it could have the graphics at the side. I need to look presentable on air, but since lockdown, we don't have a makeup artist anymore. And that has been a great loss. Used to sit in a chair, have a bit of a chat, and have your hair and makeup done. And it was actually the loveliest part of the day. So I have to fix my own hair, do my own makeup. I do know what I'm doing now after having it done for many years, but we've got to have like a neat silhouette. So we can't have tufty bits of hair because otherwise the chroma key sort of buzzes and you'll all just be looking at that strange noise there. So generally, no distractions. I shouldn't be wearing something that all you're doing is thinking about, what is she wearing? That's really weird. Or what's that brooch there? You should be looking at me and listening to what I'm saying. Got to be professional. We can't wear green because the chroma key is green and we'd just be a floating head. No linen because that looks crushed and as though we haven't had an iron near it. No houndstooth patterns because they jump and buzz. And black tends to be saved for times of royal death. So all of us would keep a black tie or a black jacket in our wardrobe. So I fix my earpiece, put my microphone on, and then it's off to the studio after checking with the gallery staff. Now that green screen is empty behind me. I'm pointing into thin air, but I can see myself ahead in the camera head. So I can see myself and the graphics ahead, but it's backwards. So it does take a bit of a time, which sometimes we're not unnecessarily waving. It's trying to place your hand in the right place. So some chroma keys are blue. So if you see somebody wearing green, that's because their chroma key is blue. Some have an outline of the chart on them, and that makes it much easier to just plant your hand on Edinburgh if needed. So the director speaks to me through my earpiece and then counts out when I've got to finish, 3, 2, 1, and then we smile. So we are there to engage, to explain, to talk the viewers through the charts, to highlight uncertainty and the potential impacts of severe weather. We are a helping hand to accompany that set of data, and you don't get that from a weather app. Now, I am a Girl Guiding volunteer. I run a unit of rangers who are aged 14 to 18, and I thought I would ask them for their teenage view, where'd you get your weather information from? They all said we Google it, or when pushed, they just look on the pre-installed app on their phone. They don't care where it's from if they've got some Wi-Fi. They were very keen on this. So a lot of them had Apple phones. This was on the iPhone. this they liked. They liked that little bit of text that says light rain forecast. That was enough. The symbols that were lower down, they weren't that bothered about because it involved them looking through them, and the wind arrows took too much. So they didn't want those. They liked the background picture. That sort of grey was showing how it was. I mean, most of that's an observation. It's not really a forecast. What they essentially wanted was something quick and instant. So I asked about the radio, and they said if it was on, and I took from that the parents had it on in the kitchen before they went to school. They also said they would look out the window, and they also said they would go outside to check how it felt. So that was quite good. So when I pushed them, does anybody watch the weather on the telly? They all sat in silence. And then one girl, bless her, piped up, I see it at my gran's. So it seems we've got about 10 years left of seeing the weather on the television. Okay.
Microphone.
Brilliant.
Okay. Perfect. I'll start again. Thank you for having me here today. I started working with Jo in the year 2000. I left the comfort of Met Office HQ in Bracknell and went to London, the bright lights of London, where I joined other Met Office colleagues to support the production and delivery of weather bulletins and graphics and forecasts to the independent TV broadcasters. These genuinely were some of the best years of my career, working alongside some well-known faces that you might recognise in these photos. Fast forward 24 years and I'm now head of ITV Weather. I manage a team of 25 weather presenters, many of whom are ex-Met Office colleagues. ITV works in partnership with the Met Office. The relationship between the two companies is very strong and long-standing. Alongside the delivery of data, my team have briefings similar to Jo with the Ops Centre in Exeter. Now, Jo's already described her role at STV, and for my team, it's a very similar day, although we've never had makeup artists, Jo, so lucky STV. So I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Jo laid out in her talk. Jo's anecdote about the guides is an important point. One thing we absolutely know is that linear TV is in decline. Put simply, linear TV is our traditional television medium with content delivered by satellite or cable. In contrast, in a recent study, 85% of respondents said they were paying for 2 or more monthly streaming subscriptions. So Jo's guides reflect both now and the future. If that's the case, what's the future of TV weather broadcasts? Well, we know that in extreme weather, the public do return to TV. Our viewing figures during the recent storms of Bert and Dara were very high. So although mobile phones may be acceptable, the apps might be acceptable to many on a day-to-day basis, when more detail, when more understanding, and perhaps more accuracy is needed, the public seem to revert back to their TV news broadcasts when it matters. Public trust in TV weather presenters is extremely high, but one of the biggest challenges for the organisations like the Met Office and indeed broadcasters like ITV, STV and BBC is misinformation. Many of you might remember the dreaded barbecue summer tagline. We see it all the time, big headlines like these, and they can be very damaging. They spread inaccurate, misleading, and sensationalized weather information, and it's a growing issue. We call it clickbait. Social media and online platforms are key contributors, and unlike broadcasters who must adhere to strict Ofcom guidelines, these channels, in contrast, are unregulated. So we have to balance the rise of mobile apps against the human presenter guiding viewers through the intricacies of the forecast. But it isn't easy. Bulletin lengths are short. Our lunchtime regional bulletin is just 45 seconds. And some bulletins are even shorter than that. We have limited time, yet we're expected to simplify complex scientific concepts without compromising accuracy. We also need to cater for diverse audiences with varying levels of understanding, and add to that the pressure to integrate flooding, air quality, pollen, air pollution into these bulletins too. So we've established that public expectations are high. We have to meet the needs of our viewers for accurate and timely forecasts, and at the same time manage their understanding of different data sources. Not only do we face these challenges routinely, it's becoming more difficult to deliver a weather forecast now without mentioning climate change. 10 years ago, very few people would expect to hear climate change being referred to in our broadcasts. There was the old line that we would use quite routinely: you can't attribute one single event to climate change. But now, with advanced modelling and improvements in science, attribution studies almost close to real time do allow us to determine if a specific rainfall event, for example, was made worse by our warming and changing climate. Storm Boris is a perfect example. Scientists at World Weather Attribution analysed the rain which fell over 4 days during Storm Boris in Central and Eastern Europe. And they compared it to a simulated world which was 1.3 Celsius cooler. They found that in our current climate, that the storm was twice as likely to happen, and the rain was 7% more intense than a world which had not been as warmed by burning fossil fuels. So now you can really see the challenges of our role and the pressure we face: misinformation, limited time, public expectations, climate change, the list goes on. If we want, and indeed need, to instill the importance of our role and the value of TV weather broadcasting, we need to balance many things and try new ways of reaching our audience.
So the future. Already there are strong links within the newsroom. There's the broadcast side, who concentrate on the 6, 10 o'clock news and other bulletins dotted throughout the day. And the digital side, who write for online and upload content to the websites on an ongoing way, and the news app. So video content does very well, but there is a logistical issue when recording for television. It has to be landscape, and then for the phone use, it has to be portrait, so upright. If there is a big weather story coming, then the digital team will be keen for a film chat with the weather presenter. Again, for the extra detail and a trusted explanation, someone who can present and has good communication skills, but understands the media rules and the organisation's expectations. So the role already includes preparing and recording the bulletins that run straight after the news, but additionally now, what's needed is to create this online content or provide copy for the digital reporter. This month, there were standalone warning updates before the main weather bulletin that were then easily moved across to online. And the challenge here is their durability. It needs monitoring. If the warnings are changed by the Met Office, will that recording be useful for very long? Weather content online is very popular. It's quite a neutral topic. Say when heavy snow is forecast or severe weather is looming, the viewing figures for STV News and Weather on Friday, the 22nd of November, so the day before Storm Bert was due, by 16% compared to the previous week. Climate change and nanny state warnings are two angles that do lead to discord, but overall, severe and extreme weather is a popular and positive news topic. Head of STV Digital, David Milne, said that upcoming big weather events and strangely missing people articles are two topics that do very well online. There's an overall one-way flow of positive public opinion. David also spoke about how weather presenters guide people through the data and the story. It's a very traditional setup around the world of a news desk, historically with a man reading the news and a presenter standing by the weather map. But that has certainly changed over the decades, thinking about the Holy Mail lineup before Barbara Edwards appeared. So we are slightly informal, friendly. In quieter weather times, we are comforting and familiar. Yet when needed, we have the expertise and can assist. As our climate changes and the UK experiences more frequent and extreme weather events, people and communities need to grow their own resilience. We outline the weather forecast, the potential impacts, giving reliable information for people to make decisions, their own decisions. And that's the point of weather broadcasts. You decide. Will you need a coat and an umbrella? Will you need to get up a bit earlier to de-ice the car? To perhaps set off later in Storm Dara? Or rest inside on a day of intense heat? Weather apps may be popular and easy. They're there at your fingertips at any time of the day. But I've heard that people can flit in between different ones if they see the rain is shown at an inconvenient time. There are TikTok broadcasts, zany, moving about versions aimed at a younger audience, but they're not really having a major impact. What is working at the minute is this additional content filmed specifically for digital channels. A short, snappy version under 1 minute to summarize and be shown on demand on a phone. Another exciting challenge for the future is how to include uncertainty in the broadcasts. Back in October 2023, here, the Royal Met Soc heard from the Met Office's Ken Milne about ensemble and probability forecasting. Currently, there are a few in-depth forecasts that manage to highlight 2 or 3 possible solutions rather than one deterministic outlook for day 5. Ken was confident that the public could cope with ensemble forecasting, but we're not quite so sure. Talking to managers, weather managers over the years, we have been discouraged from using complicated synoptic pressure charts too much. Even wind arrows were deemed unnecessary at one point, but the weather forecasters vigorously to get this back. So next, adding in this uncertainty, different solutions, we've introduced the jet stream charts. They're now more familiar. Temperature contour one showing air mass change. If we are going to show different solutions, will the public just say, you've got no idea what's going on? It's been hard enough to even explain what hit and miss showers will mean.
Better at this, shouldn't I, putting a microphone on? But you've heard from Jo and I about how weather bulletins have come to life, the challenges that we face on a daily basis, the past, the future, and something that we wanted to really draw out was how we can safeguard the future of TV weather forecasts. There is a place, I think, for TV weather forecasts, but I think we've also got to balance the sort of drive to deliver a lot more content on a more digital platform. I think one thing that we can be confident about is trust that the weather presenters have with our audience. And I think maintaining that trust is a really important thing. I think we need to be transparent about our forecast limitations and uncertainties, and perhaps this is where the idea from Ken to sort of think about talking about different models and describing ensemble forecasting may well be a future in the UK. At the same time, we need to foster a sense of community and a connection with our viewers, maintaining that trust. We know the future of TV weather forecasting needs to embrace new technologies and innovations, and strengthening collaboration between meteorologists, scientists, and broadcasters is more important now than ever. There's a lot of false information out there. You saw from those headlines, and it is really damaging. We need to promote accurate information and trusted weather forecasts. In turn, this will contribute to a better understanding of climate change and its impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. That was really, really interesting. Interesting to know a lot about the future as well and where we're going with it all. And apologies for the microphone. I've actually got a third and I was just testing the microphone. And we've got a nice age range as well in the audience. I'd be interested to hear some questions around everyone's use of forecast, and any questions online. Yeah, welcome to either ask directly or I can sort of read a question out for you. I usually take the initiative to take my own question first. I was going to ask you about the uncertainty and explain that, because that's a big part of the work I do is that, but you addressed that, so that was good to hear. So my second question was then around one of the other bits of feedback I hear about of people's interest and engagement with weather forecasts is to how to make it local and relevant to them. So if you're doing a national forecast, how do you go about making it relevant at that real local level? When you've talked about how much time you've got, is there a way, is there sort of skills to make it relevant to people at that local level?
I think primarily we're both lucky to work for broadcasters that have regional news output, and I think we would very much rely on those regional news broadcasts to kind of deliver that local scale. So I think in reality, the national bulletins will always give that broader picture, and we would try and signpost to the regional bulletins to kind of ensure that people are tuning in and getting that local detail. Mm-hmm. And then I'd suggest obviously the digital channels and making sure we're pushing out the content and making it specific and local at the time it's needed, because obviously all events will be, you know, perhaps bespoke or specific to a particular area. Wales, for example, this weekend, we made sure a lot of our resource went into covering the conditions in Wales and the West Country.
And I think that is key, that there's no point going around the houses saying, oh, Scotland is going to have cloud and will be 5 degrees. And then Eastern England, you just put more of the time into the impactful weather. That's the way to go for that. And just the rest of you are kind of going to be okay. Hopefully.
Thank you. Do you have any questions in the crowd first? Yeah.
Thanks. I have a slightly unfair question because it's about the recent floods in Spain. And I suppose my question is that seemed to be an example of something that got communicated very badly or something went wrong. But certainly the public seemed to think that they didn't get the information correctly, and it was kind of disastrous. So I suppose my question is, I don't know if you've got any comments about that, and do you think the UK could be in that kind of situation, or do you think they have a sufficiently different setup that sort of thing wouldn't happen?
Well, I was going to say that we obviously got, there was quite a lot of criticism, wasn't there, from Storm Bert, and the criticism that we didn't, you know, the forecasts were not timely, and did people take on board what was being communicated? So there was criticism there. So you could say there is a UK example. So it is a challenge. Personally, I think the communication was strong, the forecast was solid. It is hard when people have got multiple sources to get their weather information and their weather content. We're always going to have that battle. Obviously, the BBC benefit from a 24/7 news channel, so they have the ability to put longer forecasts to air and routinely update. Commercial broadcasters, ITV and STV, don't have a 24/7 news channel, so therefore we do compete for airtime, and we have 3 to 4 news bulletins per day with the weather content that sits within it. So there is less time for us to be able to articulate and convey and get that information across. But that's why we use the digital space to add more information and make sure it is available to people. But it is always going to be a challenge because people will kind of find their sources from different places. And it is everything we've talked about. You've got apps that are different providers. People are using the Apple app, and that's American data. And I'm not suggesting it's inaccurate or accurate, but there are just so many sources of data out there, and just lack of understanding, which I think we're always going to struggle because we're very lucky. We operate in the community of understanding the weather and are passionate about it. But there is a vast amount of people that just wouldn't know the information that we are lucky to know.
And I'll address Spain. So AEMET had similar problems to perhaps what Met Office did, that they put out their warning in the morning, and it was the filtering down. There were political influences on what happened there in terms of departments who was to react. And AEMET, then the Spanish Met Service, then got grief. And there was a lot of misinformation to the point where they started to put out their own comms into the press to offset that and say, hold on a minute, we had a red warning in the morning. We don't understand why people are still going out. So those problems are here in the UK already as well.
Yes, thanks, Jim. Just picking up on one of Jo's comments on the first part of your talk, Jo, where you said that, you know, in your estimate, we've got 10 years left or thereby of weather broadcasting on television. Now, you know, anything that is in the digital realm so far has not really come true. If you look at, you know, when Netflix and similar streaming services started, everyone says, no need to go to the cinema, people just won't go anymore. How wrong was that? When books became available and literature became available online, libraries said libraries, oh, who's ever going to want to go to the library? But libraries then reinvented themselves as district and community hubs. So is there not an opportunity to...
For us to reinvent ourselves?
Yeah, to reinvent.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, we see programs about climate change, and climate change is still slightly politically related, so it can be difficult and challenging to make an honest program about it, an unbiased program. But we don't get regular bulletins about the effect of climate change, for example. Is it not time to think about reinvention of what's actually happening in the Weather Service?
We are doing some of that already. So if any of you are up early to watch Good Morning Britain, then Laura Tobin will be presenting bulletins. Her first slot, actually, the 6:30, is generally content around climate change, and in order to draw out often perhaps global stories, but where needed, UK stories, making it relevant, connecting it back to the UK so the public do understand. So we are starting to sort of push out more climate information and broadcast, making it digestible, putting context to it, because I think people need to understand, what does that mean for me? So we are doing a fair bit of that now, but appreciate that, particularly as it from our side on the commercial TV, there just isn't the airtime, so we sort of definitely grab it when we can. But one of the key things that we're doing is not to say that we will stop broadcasting on television. That'll continue, that'll always continue. It's just that it's balancing out. There'll be a lot of people on streaming services such as Netflix. So one thing ITV did last year is they launched their own streaming service called ITVX, and we launched a news rail. So we're making sure that we're putting our content across multiple platforms just to make sure we are meeting the needs for a different audience, a younger audience. So it's about ensuring that information is there, not just on one platform or one service, it's across multi-platform.
I'll come to you in a second, David. Anyone that has a question online, if you put your hand up on the Zoom, then we can come to you as well when it comes to on the online section. But I'll go to one of our younger audience members first, if that's okay.
I'm just wondering where it says specifically about limitations and uncertainties, and I know it's not necessarily the Met Office, but I wonder if either of you had any thoughts on the feasibility of, say, the BBC running a 14-day forecast. Like, so that's something that is, what, when you say trust with the audience, if people can trust that, because I know it changes quite a lot in those 14 days.
I think it'll come down to, do we need to? The Met Office, if you watch some of their output on their apps and on their website, that's exactly what Aidan was doing in one of the images that you saw earlier. They've got the opportunity, because they've got the time and created the platforms to be able to put that type of information out there, utilising their credibility and their authority. And it's something, when I was at the Met Office, it's what we talked about. How can we differentiate? And it's not to say the BBC couldn't do that, but again, it's thinking about the audience. Does, you know, I'm thinking, does everybody want that? Does, you know, is it important for the day-to-day public to hear that 14-day forecast, given that it is likely to change? So it's about thinking about different platforms, different needs across different sites. So I think what the Met Office are doing is fantastic. And it might be the BBC again. We have to think about the audience that we're serving and the amount of different content we've got to put out there. So I'm not sure that a 14-day forecast would be useful. Equally, last week ahead of Storm Dara, Matt Taylor did a fantastic forecast where he did actually put up the American model, the European model, and it was quite, it was brilliant to sort of see him actually try to explain the different model output. It wasn't easy, and he needed the airtime to do it. And it'll be interesting. I was going to pick up the phone and ask him how that went to him, but we are starting to put out different content and test different ways in which we can engage with the audience.
I think one of the only times they might is if lingering high pressure, to say the trend is for that to stay. That might be the strongest signal, and something that maybe farmers might want to know, and especially maybe in drought situation as well.
Thanks.
So kind of jumping on that, when you're talking about event attribution, do you see that becoming a major part of like public communication as climate change gets worse? Like, do you see that becoming a day-to-day part of your forecast, directly attributing more and more events to climate change?
I think that if you were doing an interview and you're thinking, oh, what are they going to ask me? They'd always say, is it climate change? But we could probably say that for like, I don't know, 7 years. So we'd always have an answer. But I think that answer has changed. We don't have to hedge these two sides. We've now got the proof in things that Mona mentioned for Storm Boris.
Yeah, I think we're going to use attribution studies all the time now. We've already had it for Dara. I've seen a press release today. So I think it's really important to make sure we're communicating back to the public and to the audience to know that the weather that we saw was, you know, worse because of climate change. I think we've really got to put the effort into explaining the severity of the situation. You know, I shouldn't talk about climate change too much, but I'll go on my a bit tricky. But yeah, anyway, yes, I do think attribution studies are important, and because the science is allowing us to do it even closer to real time, it's even more relevant. So it's phenomenal that we've got Boris, Dara, we've worked, we've got so much content and data now. So yes, we should.
I was quite taken by the example you gave early on of what the Girl Guides are using and how much information they take in. And they seem to have an appetite for so little information that presumably radio will give you that information just as well. And I just wonder if the trends you see in the TV broadcasting of weather are the same in radio. And do the youngsters use radio?
I don't think they do use radio. It's podcasts these days.
Spotify.
Yeah.
Their own music.
Yeah.
My focus group was a very small group. of like 13 representative of everyone.
I guess it's as a sort of follow-up. It's not as much radio. It's just on demand seems to be the key. So it's not that it's not listening to anything audio. It's just that it's not live. So I guess it's the content, if you can filter that in appropriately.
And Shipping Forecast still has a huge following, very dedicated listeners there. Not necessarily teenagers, but it has its market.
Do you have any questions or hands up online?
Hi, I have my hand up. It's Jeff.
Have we got it wrong?
No, has something gone wrong?
Oh, gone wrong. Oh,
Obviously, we
yes. Many things go wrong because the battery pack could go. I mean, the studio lights could even go. We're just so reliant on power. So that has happened.
we have to put a bit like this, to put the graphics into play, you have to press F5. It's really simple. You just press F5. But it can look like they are in play and they're not. So when you start to click, it doesn't do anything. And I mean, there've been occasions when somebody's mic isn't on or the graphics freeze. I think that's the one you really hope, because the graphics are telling you your story. They're the aid memoir of what am I going to say next. So if they don't, you've got to fill maybe 2 minutes from memory.
I've got a question as well, if you can take another one online.
Yeah, Juliet, are you able to ask? We should hear you through our side.
Thank you. Perhaps mainly for Manali. I was wondering if you're aware of the revolution in weather forecasting in France. France 2, which is like the BBC, I guess, or all of the channels, now includes daily information, not just the attribution of the extreme weather events. Daily information connecting the weather forecast to the underlying climate crisis. They're our closest neighbours. It seems to be really popular in France. Do you think it would be possible to do something similar in the UK?
I've seen the very talk. So yes, I've seen it. I think it's brilliant. And I'd love to see that in our broadcast and on air. It's something that we've just appointed a new director of news at ITV, and it's something that I will be talking to about. But as I said, we have got some kind of positive stories to be able to sort of relate to, as I mentioned, Laura Tobin and what she does in the early hours on the Good Morning Britain output. So we are doing some of that climate education, climate narrative there. It's just difficult. As I said, we're competing for airtime, but I would love to see what the team in France are doing.
You minimize this. Oh, just stop sharing them. We can actually see them. Yeah, stop sharing. Yeah, that's fine. If you ask your question, Jeff, and we'll.
Hello.
Yep.
Right. Okay. I think things were dropping out a moment ago. Yeah, I've been watching weather forecasts for a long time. Way back, growing up as a fascinated person in the weather in the 1950s when I was really tiny. And I'm going to say something, and I appreciate everything that has been said this evening. I can see it. I can see the difficulties. But I have a feeling that the best weather forecasts on the television were in the 1980s and particularly the 1990s. And I think since then, we've actually lost something. Technology's improved considerably, the forecasting has improved considerably, but we don't seem to be getting that improvement across. Yeah, we can, I think, getting on graphics, what cloud looks like is incredibly difficult. So there are difficulties, but I do think we sometimes lose it by broad brush statements. Every time rain comes in, whether it's a shower or rain, we call it outbreaks of rain. Or if it's a little bit less sunny than yesterday, more in the way of cloud. Or even temperatures in single figures. We seem to have lost hill fog, ground frost, some of the nuanced phrases. And this worries me a little bit because it seems that across the broadcasting sphere, the bulk of the meteorologists all seem to use the same phrases. So I'm quite disappointed in that. But I would ask for speakers, if we think of television and we think of what you can access presumably on smartphones, point places, the weather in Edinburgh or Dundee or wherever, what are the advantages of television? We talked about summer weather. We can say, yeah, the whole of the East Coast will clear due to a nice sea breeze coming in. Or that chart that was shown way back in the days of black and white, of hill fog and stuff up at West Coast. We can do simple things like that, where the viewer can see the aerial coverage, so they would know not to go. So any thoughts along those lines?
I think that people have their own different styles. So there will be people who use more technical language. There might be the perception that people don't understand the difference, but maybe that's where we are with what the media we are in, what the BBC, what the ITV are looking for. So
yeah, I think one thing that we've got to factor in is the audience that's probably here today is an engaged audience that probably has a good grounding and understanding of weather and meteorology.